This is section 2.3, and today we're going to talk about applying deductive reasoning, and this is a little different than inductive. Inductive used like your instincts, your intuition, those kind of IN words. Deductive reasoning uses facts, definitions, properties, rules of logic. This is a little more, you have evidence that something is going to happen instead of your gut. And there are two different laws of logic that we use when we're talking about deductive reasoning. One of them is called the law of detachment, which says if the hypothesis is true, then the conclusion is true. Kind of feels like a does statement. But if P, then Q is our statement, and then we usually follow it up by saying P is true. True. Hold on one second. I just had to close my door here. So when you're talking about the law of detachment, you get an if and a then you talk about your P being true. So if I go to Dairy Queen, then I get ice cream. I went to Dairy Queen. What you would write for me then is, I had ice cream. If we win tonight, then we get to go to state. We won tonight. So the conclusion is we go to state. If I have school spirit, then I'm going to dress up during homecoming week. I have school spirit, so the conclusion is I will dress up for homecoming week. You don't create another if-then. We're not looking for any overlap to like cross off. We are just trying to figure out what the conclusion would be. The other type is called the law of syllogism, and this is involving two different if-then statements. So if this is true, then that. If that's true, then that. So you're kind of just following a trail. We kind of equate it to that book, If You Give a Mouse a Muffin. So if you give a mouse a muffin, then it wanted something else. If it wanted something else, then it wanted something else. And so kind of you just followed the train as you were going to figure out what the end would be. What happens here is any overlap you have, you get to cross off. And as long as you have an if and a then left, that is your conclusion. So if we win, we go to state. If we go to state, then we get to go to the banquet. So if we win, we go to the banquet. We can just kind of take out the middle because that's overlap. It's repeated information. And we just kind of want to skip to the conclusion. If I go to Dairy Queen, then I've got cash. If I've got cash, then I'm getting ice cream. So if I go to Dairy Queen, I'm getting ice cream. I can cut out the middle part about repeated information with having to do with cash. So a couple of practice laws here. So if x is greater than 12, then this is true. So here's my P, then my Q. And they're telling me that x is 14. So x is greater than 12, which means my P is true. So I just have to list out my conclusion. It's much like this one. If P then Q, my P is true, then I just have to write the conclusion. So that means that 14 plus 9 is going to be greater than 20. If I get my license, then I get a car. If I get my license, then I'm at least 16. So I see two if-thens. I'm going to cross off the stuff that overlaps, that repeats, that extra information, and I'm left with two thens. If that happens, if you can't form an if-then, then there is no conclusion. It didn't follow this pattern. When I crossed off the overlap, I wasn't left with an if and a then. I was just left with two thens, and that's not going to work. If I study, I'll pass geometry. If I pass geometry, then I'm cool. So taking out the overlap again. This time I'm left with an if-then, so my conclusion is if I study, then I'm cool. Two more to practice. If it's raining today, then my car will be wet. If my car is wet, then I'll have to wash it. So taking out the overlap, I end up with, if it's raining today, then I'll have to wash my car. One with a little bit of math in it. If x squared is greater than 25, then x squared is greater than 20. If x is greater than 5, then x squared is greater than 25. So I do see some overlap, some repeated information. I am left with an if and a then. So that is my conclusion. These are kind of tricky for students sometimes, being able to come up with what the conclusion would be, being able to tell the difference between when you have just a PQ and when you have an if-then, and cutting out the overlap. So make sure that you practice on that worksheet that goes with this so you can get a lot of exposure to many different types of laws of logic.